Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar weekly discussion topic video. This one is going to be some more talk about, I suppose, Avatar comics, the future of Avatar comics. It's similar to topics I've done fairly recently, but this one especially, I want your guys' feedback on this. Like, if you watch this video, definitely leave a comment about what your thoughts on this are. In that, this is me going to be basically talking about, you know, the idea of, like, do they need to change the direction with Avatar comics going forward? Given that they're going on break now while core comics happen, and then stuff like the New York Comic Con panel from last year where they got feedback about what fans actually want in the comics, has that actually taken Dark Horse by surprise in terms of, like, oh, you guys aren't just give us more comics that feature the Avatar comics. You actually want the big things to be covered. You want this little thing here covered, this big backstory covered, this thing here. So definitely give me your feedback on it as we go through. But let's jump straight in with, obviously, the reaction to North and South. Now that it's fully released, it's out in comic book stores, it's out digitally, it's out in regular bookstores. It's fair to say the general fan response on average to this book has been just like, it's good, but that's about it. Like, there's not a lot of discussion happening about this book because it's just like, okay, there's one or two really nice scenes, but like, there's nothing big to talk about. It doesn't really change things up. And in that sense, it speaks to, like, why I think people are really, like, asking for something big to happen in the next Avatar comic and expecting something like a Timeskip to happen next. Because North and South, I think, for a lot of people represented, like, in a way, this is the first time one of the Avatar comics has just been a licensed Avatar comic. Rather than the comics really feeling like, oh, the Avatar comics are different than all other licensed comics. They're really telling the continuation of the story. I think for a lot of people, it was just like, North and South is just kind of like comics that include the character. They're trying really, you know, in basic ways to link into the story that's happening, but it doesn't tell enough. It doesn't link in enough, and there's no big enough character arc to really kind of like get people invested in this series. So the big question, I think, now going forward is, what does the next Avatar comic have to do to bring back the excitement around Avatar comics? Because the reaction for North and South has been just very, like, dull. It's just been like, oh, the book, people have read the book, most people have enjoyed it to some degree, but it's just come and gone. Like, there hasn't been a ton of discussion about this. No one's talking about, like, Gilak or the plot of North and South or what exactly happened. Anytime you see anyone talk about North and South, it's like, oh, this really nice Katara and Aang moment. It's really fun to see the characters eating together at the end. It's the little kind of fun character moments that happen at the end, rather than anyone really caring a massive amount about, oh, Melina and Malik and the plans for the oil refinery in the South and what Gilak is influencing the South versus the North and all this sort of stuff. It just didn't hit as big as it maybe should have, because they didn't commit to the arcs that I think people were invested in. Whereas, say what you will, like the promise, at the very least, it's just a direct continuation of just, what's the situation in the world like with regards to, like, who's leading and, like, who's making the big decisions in the world, and it deals with the leaders. The Search, the second comic, of course, Zuko's mom, that's just a story everyone wanted to know. The Rift, you know, that actually deals with a lot of really, really interesting topics. You know, the first joint nation company, plus the instant thing that's grabbing people's attention of just like, oh, Toph focus, dealing with her issues with her parents. People are invested in that story, and so on. Then Smoke and Shadow, I think, had people's interest just because, like, oh, May getting a character spotlight. That's really, really interesting, that she's basically a main character in that book. Plus, you know, Azula continuing to be a big thing. So the question becomes now, North and South came and went. No one's, like, I think, ripping the book apart for, like, being really bad. Even I, like, I'm more on the side of, like, yeah, this didn't really hit the mark all that well. But I don't hate the book. I still like a decent amount of the scenes. It's a good character arc for Katara and so on. But it definitely wasn't, I don't think it was as popular as Dark Horse wanted. And so I think the way to interpret, like, the reaction to all parts of North and South plus the fact that the fans, when asked directly by one of the kind of marketing people who run the Avatar side of things at Nickelodeon, plus Dark Horse people, when they asked the fans directly at New York Comic Con, everything was like, basically everything was Avatar related. Very few people were like mentioning like core things that they want to happen. It was all Avatar stuff that they want covered in the comics. And a lot of it was like characters getting married, having kids. It was just the continuation of our characters' arcs, but the big moments, the important moments in their lives. It was, what's Iroh's backstory? Tell us that in detail about what exactly happened there. That sort of thing. And I think that's what we've been waiting for with the way the comics have been going up to now. But the problem has always been that the characters are still just a little bit too young to properly commit to like showing proposals, showing the marriages, showing the characters having kids. So that's why I think most people are like, Timeskip, just so all of the characters are old enough where this stuff can actually happen. That at any point in one of the comics after the Timeskip, Aang could propose to Katara. At any point during this Timeskip, like Zuko and Mei could get married, or something like that. Maybe we're not going to jump so far ahead that immediately the characters have kids, but like, I think people really want to see the Katang proposal and see like how their wedding happens with regards to like, okay, did they have it in the Water Tribe? How much air nomad stuff did he include in that wedding? Is there any complications because of the fact that it's, people from two different nations coming together? That sort of thing. And then like, obviously the question would be like, Aang doesn't necessarily have a home as such. Like, he's just kind of like living where the action is, basically, as the Avatar. So like, where does that conversation happen with regards to like Katara and Aang deciding where they're going to live once they commit to getting married? It's the things like that, plus also the world building aspects of like, as we are in the comics right now, we know Yudao basically becomes Republic City, but where does the Water Tribe connection come in? When does the Water Tribe get involved in that? When does this decision become made that this is a place that is going to have like world representatives like from each of the nations that have a place on the council within this city? This is now a city that is basically open to all people to come to as this like central point in the world that represents all four nations. When does all those decisions actually get made? Stuff like Sokka, even though he was a bit more included in North and South, he's never really had a focus as such in any of the comics up to now. So when does the decision get made between, let's say, Hakoda and Sokka that, okay, the world leaders have agreed that we're all going to have, each of the nations are going to have a representative on the council in this new Yudao Republic City. Sokka, I want you to be the representative for the South. When does that conversation happen? Because I think that's something that people were wondering if it was going to happen. Like, there was great Hakoda and Katara scenes, but like, where was the Hakoda Sokka scenes? Where was the setup of like Sokka is older than Katara, that he is next in line to be the leader of the South? Where was that stuff in North and South? And when are we really building towards getting to a point where like our characters are eventually get to those positions where they have huge roles within like Republic City? It's just like, yeah, we're waiting for, when does Toph become involved in the police force for Republic City? Like, where does that come into play? Even now, okay, she's becoming more of a kind of businesswoman type thing. So okay, she's becoming less like, woo, let's break the rules, and maybe kind of calming down a bit. But how does she go from being let's break the rules to let's enforce the rules? Like, that's a big character arc that you need to make. Like, you've sort of set up that effectively, like, the metal bending students are effectively training the people who will eventually become the first metal bending officers. But like, when does the metal bending like armor get made? The metal spools, wires. When does that get invented? That sort of thing. The other big thing would be going back to the Katara Aang. Where do they live? Air Temple Island. When does that come into play? Like, obviously it makes sense that if Republic City is going to be the central point in the world, it makes sense that Aang would live there. It makes sense that Aang and Katara would live there, raise their family there, for sure. And it makes sense in that, like, obviously Tenzin would have to have, grown up in Republic City, that he hasn't just randomly decided to live on Air Temple Island. When did they, like, discover this island and decide that, oh, this is the place that's going to be the central Air Temple, basically? It's moments like that, plus Sky Bison. When does Aang discover the other Sky Bison? Plus the other lemurs. When does that, like, little journey happen? And I think that's what they need to do going forward with the comics. They have to really make it so that the comics have really strong character moments that, like, are focusing on characters at, like, important moments, stages in their lives, that notable things happen, and also in the plot decent stuff happens as well. Whereas, like, the problem with North and South, I think, was for sure that the plot ultimately, by the end, not a lot was going to happen in the story, and then you'd think that the big character moments would make up for that, but it was surprisingly lax with regards to how many big character moments there were. Like, there was no Zuko messing around with Gran Gran on the return to the South. There wasn't a lot of Katang moments where they were really talking about things. You didn't really get too heavy into, like, Katara and Sokka's relationship back in the South or anything like that. So North and South, I think, has had such a kind of subdued reaction because it just, on both sides, just the fun character stuff plus the plot stuff, it kind of just failed to deliver. So next comics, they need to just be like, anything can happen. These big moments that have to happen in between this point and this point, they could happen at any moment. And I think that's kind of what they need to do. And I think with some of the bigger plot points that are still left open, mainly Azula, I think you can still have that be a thing where, like you say, you time skip ahead like 3 years and say, okay, everyone is at least 18 of our main characters at this point, 18, maybe 19. And then you just address basically these ideas of, like, okay, Zuko has dealt with, like, Azula constantly doing things in the Fire Nation, and it's been, it's been affecting him, and he just decides that, no, this has to end. We have to deal with Azula and stop these issues that she's causing in the Fire Nation. That would make sense, that she's managed to avoid, not be caught by Zuko for that long, and it's just this final moment of, like, we've got to stabilize things before Republic City becomes a big thing. We deal with Azula, we address Republic City moving forward, we have maybe a proposal happen in the background. That's what people want, and I really hope that that part of the reason why we haven't had just immediately the next Avatar comic announced, or no real information about it apart from, like, yeah, maybe Avatar comics will continue going forward. That's what Dark Horse are saying. Maybe the reason why they aren't saying anything is because maybe the plan is kind of changing a bit. Maybe they're fully committing to, like, the fans want more. They want the characters older. They want more advancement towards, like, addressing the stuff that, like, from Korra, we know happens with these characters, but we don't know, like, how they get there, how they move from here to here, filling in those gaps in a bigger way. Right now with the comics, it sort of feels like we are far too linked into the very end of ATLA. We're still way too close to that, and too far away from a lot of the big stuff actually happening. So a time skip for me absolutely needs to happen going into the next comic series. And I think while I wouldn't be just, like, really, like, disappointed and just like, oh, I can't believe they're doing this, if they just announce the next Avatar comic series and it just follows up immediately after North and South, I think there's definitely a sense of just, like, we've got to move things on a bit. I think just with regards to the whole idea of just, like, why is so much stuff happening, like, this close together? Like, split things up a bit, like, Korra had a 3-year time skip, and, you didn't need to go crazy with regards to, like, filling in that, like, oh, all these things happened in these past 3 years. Just get an idea of, like, look, the past 3 years were a bit of a struggle without, like, Korra doing stuff, but we're here now to deal with it, and do something similar with the Avatar comics, I think. You've shown in Korra that you can do a 3-year time skip without needing to go crazy filling in the gaps. Whereas what you really need to do is fill in the like 70-year gap between ATLA and where Korra is. And it's just stuff like that. Like, another thing, like, on the podcast last week, on Sunday, that we talked about was just like, it'd just be fun to just get to see a lot of our characters older, like what their designs would look like. We're gradually seeing in the comics the characters' design shift a bit, but they still feel very linked to the fact that, oh, they're still kids right now. Whereas, like, skip ahead 3 years and you're just like, okay, you have like young adult like Aang, Katara, Sokka, Toph, and you're just like, what do they look like when they're kind of just like they just become adults? Like, what do our characters look like when they're really considered adults? And with regards to their bending, like when they're in their prime, that there's very little training for them to do, that they've basically hit their peak, they can do the crazy powerful stuff like at ease. That like Aang, I think always to a degree has like, you felt like he's held back because like he's not fully grown yet, and he doesn't have like the physical strength to do as much as maybe he could if he was older. And so just getting to filling in the gap between where Aang is now and like him like facing Yukon when he just seems so powerful and strong, things like that are what I think need to be a bigger factor in the comics. Because I do think there's this case right now with the comics where like they really feel the need to constantly be like, they're for kids. Like these comics are primarily written for kids, when I think the main comic audience, the majority of the people contributing to the sales of these comics, and I don't think I'm too far out of line saying this, is the fandom, which is fully grown and want to see these characters at the age that they are, at the age of where most of the readers are. That we've grown up with these characters, show us these characters at this age. Because we got to see like the Korra characters at more or less our age for most of us, kind of, basically transitioning from teenagers into adults. Show us the same thing with the Avatar characters. So like that's something I think they really do need to do, and I hope they realize that yes, I am sure like actual kids who buy these comics contribute somewhat to the sales. But again, the people that go to your panels, that fill out those panels when there's news about Avatar comics, those are the main people reading the comics. Those are the main people discussing it, buying them, and so on. And I think you do need to some degree aim them at those people. That, again, coming back to that New York Comic Con thing, when you ask the fans, there's a reason you're asking the fans, is because they know what they want. We know what we want as Avatar comic fans and what we want to see. And while I don't want to say that the biggest Avatar comic fans speak for the entire fandom, but when you're that into something and you kind of are like, this is something you need to tell in the comics, that's kind of something you should listen to the fandom on. That like, yes, of course, like who wouldn't want to buy a comic that just like focuses on like Iroh's backstory? Who wouldn't read the comic that's like Katang's proposal and wedding and stuff like that? It may seem a bit like, oh, why are we focusing so much on the romance? But that's something we want to see because we care about those characters. Again, not everyone ships Katara and Aang, but it is the canon ship, so why not show this relationship kind of coming together in that way and having the wedding happen, just to see what actually happened there. It just seems weird that we made such a big deal about like Katara and Aang get together at the end of the series, and then it's just like, oh yeah, we'll skip all of the other stuff that's kind of important about their relationship and just, you just assume what happens in between. So that it's that sort of thing. So for sure, in the comments of this video, let me know, do you think the comics need a kind of change in direction? Did you absolutely think there needs to be some sort of a time skip before the next comic? Or do you think they should just continue the way things have been going, of just like, the next comic follows on, a week, maybe 2 weeks after the end of North and South? Or should they go for the time skip? I think, based on what I've seen in the fandom, everyone is ready for a bigger change. Just so we get that bit closer to Republic City, the characters get that bit closer to, the marriages and stuff like that. And again, just the the sheer excitement that there's going to be about seeing our characters' older designs, seeing that kind of transition moment between like Aang where he is now at like 15, in or around 16, and where we see him in like the Old Friends poster when he looks maybe late 20s, early 30s or something like that. And that's what people want to see. But anyway, leave me those comments below. But yeah, that's been the video for this week. Thanks for listening, and bye.